The floorboards were cold against Clara Blackwood's cheek splinters, biting into her skin through the torn fabric of her dress. Each shallow breath scraped her lungs like she was swallowing broken glass. Something deep in her chest shifted with every movement, an ache too sharp to ignore. She knew what it meant. Her ribs weren't just bruised. They were broken. "My ribs are already broken," she whispered into the empty cabin air, her voice so faint it stirred nothing but the dust motes drifting lazily in the shaft of moonlight through the cracked window. Outside, boots thudded across the porch boards. That sound had once meant safety, back when Jeremiah was the brother who kept away shadows. But those days vanished when whiskey took hold of him after Pa died. Jeremiah's anger became the only constant in their home. The boots stopped. Clara froze, holding her breath, despite the fire in her chest. She prayed he would walk away. Sometimes he did. Sometimes the storm passed, leaving him quiet, even sorry. Not tonight. The door scraped open. Clara didn't move. She'd learned the hard way that looking at him only fueled the fire. Better to be still. Better to be small. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She hadn't even heard him cross the room. His words jolted her from the gray fog of pain. Clara forced her eyes up, and the first thing she saw were his boots, leather cracked and stained dark. Then his hands, knuckles raw and split. Finally, his eyes pale blue, like their father's, now cold and flat. "You think you're too good for the work I give you," he said, voice low and steady. Shouting would have been better. The quiet meant something colder than anger had settled in him. "Pa always said you had too much of your mother in you," Jeremiah muttered, circling her like a predator. "Said it would make you soft. Guess he was right." The mention of her parents stung worse than any blow. Their father had been strict, but fair. And her mother, with her soft Mexican accent and healing hands, had been gentle until consumption stole her away. Neither would have recognized the man Jeremiah had become. "Get up," he ordered. Clara pressed her palms against the floorboards, tried to rise, but the fire in her ribs flared white-hot, and she collapsed with a gasp that turned into a sob. "I said get up." This time his boot caught her shoulder enough to fling her against the wall. She curled there, shaking as something fragile inside her gave way. Not just ribs this time. Something deeper, the last piece of her that had clung to the hope he might change. "You can't do anything right." Jeremiah spat disgust, dripping from every word. He swayed slightly, the whiskey on his breath, filling the small cabin. "Tomorrow, you're going back to Maxwell's. He's asking for you special. Says you've got information." Clara stared at the shifting shadows on the wall. Time crawled by. Soon it would be dark, and he would drink himself to sleep, leaving her a few hours of quiet before the sun rose and the cycle began again. But against the wall, Clara felt something new flicker inside her chest. It wasn't peace. It wasn't hope. Not fully. But it was close. A whisper that maybe there was more than this cabin, more than Jeremiah's rage. Maybe there were places where breathing didn't come at the cost of bruises. The thought was dangerous. She pushed it away, but it didn't vanish. It settled inside her, small but stubborn, like the silver nugget her father had pressed into her palm the day before he died. "You keep this safe, Clara," he'd whispered, eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone. "Don't tell your brother. There's more where this came from, enough to set you free." That night, while Jeremiah snored in the back room, Clara rose slow and careful. Every movement sent a sharp stab through her side, but she had learned to move through pain like water slipping past rocks. Her bare feet found the floorboards that didn't creak, the path she had memorized over years of silent nights. The door stood ahead, a challenge. She'd stared at it 1,000 times, but never with the thought of walking through it and not returning. Her hand closed around the iron latch. Cold bit her palm, but she didn't let go. Behind her, Jeremiah's snores rumbled. He wouldn't wake for hours. The latch lifted with a soft click. The door opened. Night air struck her face sharp and clean, so different from the stale cabin that it made her dizzy. Above, stars pierced the black Colorado sky, too many to count, too distant to care. The porch boards felt strange beneath her feet. Yesterday morning she'd swept them clean back when she still thought she could endure. Now each step carried her away from the girl she had been. At the edge of the porch, Clara turned. The cabin looked smaller from outside, meaner somehow, just a scar on the mountainside. She didn't look back again. Thomas Garrett sat motionless in the shadow of a lodgepole pine breath, forming small clouds in the frigid air. His Winchester .73 lay balanced across his knees, ready but not threatening. Not yet. The buck he'd been tracking for the better part of the day stood 30 yards downslope, unaware of death's patient observation. One shot. That's all it would take. Meat for the winter, maybe a new pair of gloves from the hide. Simple math for a simple life. Thomas drew a slow breath, finger settling against the trigger. Then he heard the scream. The buck bolted, vanishing into the timber. Thomas didn't move, listening as the sound faded into the night. Not his business, not his fight. He'd fought enough for 3 lifetimes. But when a second scream tore through the darkness, something old and almost forgotten stirred within him. He remembered Caroline's voice, soft against his ear, their last night together. "Promise me you'll never stop being the man I fell in love with, the one who stands between harm and the innocent." He'd broken that promise 12 times since they put her in the ground, turned his back when he could have helped, walked away when he should have stood. With a sigh that held the weight of years, Thomas rose to his feet, Winchester cradled in the crook of his arm. He moved like the predator he had once been, each step deliberate and silent. The cabin came into view, a crude structure of rough-hewn logs with a single window spilling yellow lamplight into the darkness. Thomas didn't approach. Instead, he circled, finding a vantage point that offered both concealment and a clear view through the uncurtained window. Inside, a man towered over a woman curled against the wall. Even from this distance, Thomas could see the blood on her face, the way she cradled her side. The man shouted words lost to the distance, punctuating each with a kick that made the woman flinch but not cry out. She'd learned that lesson already. Crying only made it worse. Thomas knew he should walk away. This territory had rules unwritten, but understood by all who carved their existence from its unforgiving landscape. A man's business was his own, especially behind closed doors. But the woman's eyes caught the lamplight as she raised her head, and something in their hollow resignation stirred memories Thomas had spent years drowning in whiskey. Eyes like Caroline's the day he'd found her after the raid. Eyes that had seen too much, endured beyond breaking, and still somehow held on. Thomas lowered the Winchester and turned away. Not his fight. Not his business. He made it 3 steps before her scream shattered the night again. Clara stumbled through moonlit snow, each footfall a lesson in agony. The pristine white turned crimson beneath her bare feet, marking her trail for anyone to follow. She had no coat, no boots, nothing but the torn dress and the silver nugget clutched in her frozen hand. The temperature dropped with every hour, wind cutting through the thin fabric like knives. She didn't know these mountains, only that down led to town, and town meant Maxwell. Up meant wilderness and probably death. She chose up. By midnight, the snow began to fall, erasing her tracks, but stealing what little warmth remained. Her lips turned blue, fingers numbed the pain in her ribs, a distant throb beneath the greater agony of freezing. "Just a little farther," she whispered, though she had no destination. "Just keep moving." She didn't hear the wolves at first, their howls blending with the wind. But when yellow eyes appeared between the trees, reflecting moonlight like fallen stars, Clara understood she had escaped one death only to find another. The lead wolf stepped forward, lean and hungry, steam rising from its muzzle. Clara backed away slowly, knowing there was nowhere to run, no strength left to fight. The crack of a rifle split the night. The lead wolf yelped and darted away, its pack following like shadows into the darkness. Clara turned toward the sound, expecting Jeremiah ready to face his rage rather than the wolves' hunger. Instead, she saw a stranger. He emerged from the trees like a spirit, tall and broad-shouldered, a rifle held ready in hands that looked strong enough to break stone. His face was half hidden by a beard streaked with gray, but his eyes caught the moonlight, dark, watchful, measuring. "You're leaving quite a trail," he said, voice rough, as if unused to speaking. "Might as well have lit a beacon." Clara tried to answer, but her legs finally surrendered. She felt herself falling, the world tilting sideways, snow rising to meet her face. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The man cursed softly, his breath warm against her frozen skin. "My ribs are already broken," she managed to whisper. His only response was to adjust his hold, careful to avoid her side. Then he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest. "Name's Thomas Garrett," he said after a moment, "and if you've got someone looking for you, we'd best not linger." The last thing Clara saw before darkness claimed her was his face, grim and weather-worn, set in lines that spoke of sorrows carried too long alone. Jeremiah Walsh woke to cold and silence. The cabin door stood open, snow drifting across the threshold like an invitation. His head pounded from last night's whiskey mouth, dry as dust. But even through the fog of hangover, he understood immediately. She'd run. The rage came quick, familiar as an old friend. He dressed with swift, practiced movements, checking the Colt revolver before sliding it into the holster at his hip. From beneath his bed, he pulled a wooden box, opening it to reveal a silver badge, not his, but useful when needed. Outside, he studied the ground with the focus of a man who'd tracked game and men across harder terrain. The snow had covered most traces, but not all. He followed the trail to the edge of the trees, then straightened, a cold smile forming. Clara wouldn't last the night in these mountains, not injured, not without supplies. She'd either come crawling back or die trying to escape. Either way, she'd never reach Denver with what she knew. Judge Maxwell would see to that. Jeremiah whistled for his horse, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. He rode not toward the mountains where Clara had fled, but down toward Silver Creek. The judge would want to know his prize witness had bolted, and he'd pay well for her return. "Run all you want, little sister," he muttered, urging his horse toward town. "There's nowhere in Colorado you can hide." Clara woke to warmth and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she thought herself back in time before her father's death, before Jeremiah changed. Then pain reasserted itself, and memory followed. She lay on a narrow cot in a cabin not much larger than the one she'd fled. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across log walls hung with dried herbs and cured pelts. Near the door stood a rifle rack, holding the Winchester she'd seen last night, alongside a shotgun and an old cavalry carbine. The man Thomas sat at a rough-hewn table cleaning a Colt revolver with methodical precision. He didn't look up when she stirred, but his hands paused briefly, acknowledging her wakefulness. "Coffee's hot if you want it," he said, still focused on his task. "Got some jerky and biscuits, too." Clara tried to sit up, gasping as her ribs protested. Thomas finally looked over his dark eyes, assessing, but not unkind. "Ribs'll take weeks to heal proper," he said. "Best stay still as you can." "I can't stay weeks," Clara replied, her voice stronger than she expected. "My brother." "The one who did that to you." Thomas nodded toward her bruised face. "Figured as much. He'll come looking. He works for Judge Maxwell in Silver Creek. They both want something I have." Thomas reassembled the Colt with quick, practiced movements, sliding it into a holster hanging from a peg. "Everybody wants something, Miss Clara Blackwood." His eyebrows rose slightly. "John Blackwood's daughter." She nodded, surprised. "You knew my father." "Of him. Prospector who struck it rich, then died before he could claim it." Thomas poured coffee into a tin cup, bringing it to her. "Most say he killed himself after gambling away his find. Others say he was murdered." "He was murdered," Clara said flatly. "By my brother. Or half-brother, really. Different mothers." Thomas helped her sit up enough to drink the coffee, his hands surprisingly gentle for their size. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. Jeremiah was working for Judge Maxwell even then. My father found a silver vein richer than anything in these mountains. He told me where, made me memorize the location." She met Thomas's gaze directly. "The night before he died." Thomas's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted subtly. "And now they want that location." Clara nodded, wincing at the movement. "Maxwell's been trying to get it from me for months. First with offers, then threats. He can't just take my father's claim. He needs me to sign it over or tell him where to look." Her hand went to her neck, where a thin silver chain disappeared beneath her torn dress. "I have proof. A sample and a map." Thomas watched her with the steady gaze of a man who had seen too many lies to trust easily. "Why run now?" "Because Jeremiah said Maxwell was done waiting. He has other ways to make me talk." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've heard what happens to women in his brothel who don't cooperate." Thomas moved to the window, scanning the terrain beyond with the practiced eye of a scout. "Snow's covering your trail, but your brother sounds like the persistent type." "He won't stop looking," Clara said. "Not with what I know." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his broad shoulders framed against the morning light. When he turned back, his face had hardened into something Clara couldn't read. "I don't get involved in other people's troubles," he said finally. "Not anymore. Once you're strong enough to walk, I'll point you toward Denver. Federal marshals there might listen to your story." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd expected this, of course. Why would a stranger risk himself for her problems? Still, disappointment tasted bitter on her tongue. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for what you've already done." Thomas nodded once, returning to his chair. But as he sat, something fell from his pocket, a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. He quickly retrieved it, but not before Clara glimpsed the faded photograph of a woman and child. Something in his haste to hide it, the gentle way his fingers touched the paper, told Clara more about Thomas Garrett than any words could have. He, too, carried ghosts. They sat in silence as morning light strengthened each nursing private wounds. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing the world beneath pristine white. By midday, the storm cleared, leaving the mountain draped in blinding whiteness. Thomas moved about the cabin with the efficiency of a man accustomed to solitude, checking supplies, stoking the fire. He offered Clara broth and more biscuits, which she accepted gratefully. As she ate, Clara studied him covertly. He moved like a soldier, economical and alert eyes habitually scanning his surroundings. The cabin reflected the same precision, everything in its place ready for use or quick departure. "You were military," she said, not a question. Thomas glanced at her, then nodded once. "Union cavalry. Buffalo soldiers, they called us. 10th Regiment." Clara had heard of the Buffalo Soldiers' colored troops, who fought with distinction during and after the war between the states. Her father had spoken of them with respect unusual for a man of his generation. "After the war," she asked, "Apache campaigns, tracking, scout work." And his answers came short-clipped, as if each word cost something. Clara was about to ask more when Thomas suddenly stiffened. He moved to the window stance, alert hand dropping to the knife at his belt. "Someone's coming," he said, voice low. "Single rider." Fear closed Clara's throat. "Jeremiah." Thomas shook his head. "Can't tell yet." He took the Winchester from the rack, checking its load with practiced hands. "Stay inside. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, there's a trap door under the bearskin. Tunnel leads to a cave about 50 yards east." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, slipping through the door like a shadow. She struggled to her feet, pain flaring in her side, and made her way to the window. Through frosted glass, she watched Thomas take position behind a large pine rifle, ready but not aimed. The rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, a tall man on a chestnut horse, moving with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew the territory. He wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare. At his hip, a revolver gleamed dully in the winter light. As he neared the cabin, the rider called out, "Thomas, you in there, old friend?" Thomas emerged from concealment, Winchester lowered but not set aside. "Jake Hollister," he said, voice carrying in the clear air. "Long way from town." The man called Jake swung down from his saddle, hands carefully visible. "Been too long, Thomas. Thought I'd check the old fox hadn't frozen to death up here." The two men regarded each other with the wary respect of former comrades, not certain where they now stood. Then Jake grinned, extending his hand. After a moment, Thomas took it. "Coffee's hot," Thomas said, gesturing toward the cabin. Jake nodded, tying his horse to a nearby post. As they turned toward the door, his gaze swept the clearing and froze on the small footprints leading to the cabin. "You've got company," he said softly. Thomas's face revealed nothing. "Just passing through." Jake's hand drifted toward his gun. "Funny thing, I'm looking for someone. Young woman, dark hair. Ran from her brother last night." His eyes hardened. "Brother happens to be my deputy." Clara backed away from the window, heart hammering. The silver badge she'd glimpsed on Jake's coat explained everything. He was the sheriff of Silver Creek, which meant he worked for Judge Maxwell, just like Jeremiah. She'd escaped one trap only to find another. Thomas's voice carried through the door, maddeningly calm. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description." "Those tracks say different," Jake replied, "and Jeremiah Walsh is offering $50 for information on his sister's whereabouts. Says she's unstable, dangerous even. Killed their father a few years back." "That's so. That's the law's understanding." Clara's hand went to the silver chain at her neck, clutching the small pouch hidden beneath her dress. Inside lay the nugget her father had given her and a folded map leading to the richest silver deposit in Colorado. Evidence of her father's murder and of Judge Maxwell's corruption. Evidence worth killing for. Outside tension stretched between the two men. Clara looked desperately around the cabin for a weapon, anything to defend herself when the sheriff inevitably came for her. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice changed in a way Clara couldn't define. "You know, Jake, I seem to recall you owing me Picacho Pass 62, Apache ambush." A long silence followed. "I remember," Jake finally said, voice lower. "I'm alive because of you." Never called in that marker. Another pause, longer this time. Clara held her breath. "What exactly are you asking, Thomas?" "I'm asking if you're still the man I rode with. The one who knew right from wrong, even when they didn't match what was written in law books." Wind whispered through the pines, the only sound in the clearing. Then leather creaked as Jake remounted his horse. "Never saw you today," he said, voice flat. "Never saw any tracks either. But Thomas—" He paused. "Maxwell's got the whole county in his pocket. If he wants this girl, he'll tear these mountains apart to find her." "I appreciate the warning." "Don't make me regret this," Jake said, turning his horse. "And if you're smart, you'll send her far away from Colorado, because next time it won't be me riding up here." Clara watched through the window as the sheriff rode away, disappearing into the trees without looking back. Only when he'd vanished completely did Thomas return to the cabin, his face grim. "Pack whatever you can carry," he said, reaching for his saddlebags. "We're leaving." Clara stared at him, confused by the sudden change. "I thought you said you don't get involved in other people's troubles." Thomas checked his Colt before holstering it, eyes never meeting hers. "Changed my mind." "Why," Clara pressed. "You heard him. Maxwell has power. This isn't your fight." Thomas finally looked at her, something like resignation in his gaze. "Maybe I'm tired of walking away." He grabbed a coat from a peg far too large for Clara, but better than nothing. "Either way, we've got about an hour before Jake's conscience gives out, and he reports back to your brother." Clara took the coat with shaking hands. "Where will we go?" "Denver's too far with your injuries. We'll head to Silver Creek." "Silver Creek?" Clara felt panic rising. "That's Maxwell's town. Also the last place they'll expect you to go," Thomas replied, strapping on his gun belt. "And I know someone there who might help us, if he's still alive." He moved to a loose floorboard, prying it up, to reveal a small cache of ammunition and money. As he loaded his pockets, Clara saw his hands pause over a small object. He lifted it, a silver medal on a faded ribbon. "For valor," he said, noticing her gaze. "Not worth much except memories." He tucked it into his shirt pocket, then straightened, face set in lines of determination that erased years from his weathered features. "Time to go," he said, offering her his hand. "Storm's coming, and not just the weather kind." Clara took his hand, feeling calluses earned through decades of hard living. Whatever demons drove Thomas Garrett, whatever ghosts haunted his sleep, she sensed that helping her had awakened something he'd long thought dead. Hope, perhaps, or purpose. As they stepped into the blinding white of midday, Clara felt the weight of the silver map against her skin. Her father's legacy. Her death sentence if Maxwell found her. But looking at the man beside her, scarred, solitary, yet standing between her and harm, Clara thought perhaps there was a chance after all. Not just to survive, but to see justice done. Thomas helped her onto his horse, a sturdy paint that stood patient in the snow. As he adjusted the stirrups for her smaller frame, Clara saw movement at the edge of the clearing, a flash of metal in sunlight, the silhouette of a rifle barrel among the trees. "Thomas!" she cried, but too late. The crack of a rifle shattered the mountain silence. Thomas jerked backward, hand going to his shoulder where crimson bloomed against his coat. More shots followed, splintering bark from nearby trees. "Ride!" Thomas shouted, slapping the horse's flank. The paint bolted forward as Thomas dove for cover, Winchester in hand. More shots erupted from the trees, not one ambusher, but several, their bullets kicking up snow around the fleeing horse. Clara clung to the saddle, every jolt sending daggers through her ribs. Behind her, Thomas's rifle answered the attackers, his shots measured and precise compared to their wild firing. She wanted to turn back, couldn't bear leaving him to face their pursuers alone. But the horse knew its path, racing down the mountainside toward the valley below. The last thing Clara saw before trees obscured her view was Thomas standing in the open Winchester braced against his wounded shoulder, drawing their fire away from her, buying her time with his blood. Then she was in the forest alone with the thunder of hoofbeats and the terrible certainty that she had brought death to the one man who'd shown her kindness. Clara rode hard through the pine forest, each hoofbeat sending jolts of pain through her broken ribs. The paint horse seemed to know its way, navigating the treacherous mountain path with sure-footed confidence while she clung to its mane. Behind her, gunshots had faded into silence, a silence that terrified her more than the gunfire. Was Thomas dead? Had he survived? The questions pounded in her mind in rhythm with the horse's gallop. The forest thinned as they descended, revealing glimpses of a valley shrouded in morning mist. Through breaks in the fog, Clara caught sight of a town, Silver Creek, the place she'd been desperately trying to escape. Now she was riding straight toward it. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very town ruled by Judge Maxwell, the man who wanted her dead, had become her only hope for shelter. The horse slowed as the trail widened into a road. Clara glanced behind her, half expecting to see riders in pursuit, but the path remained empty. Ahead, Silver Creek awakened, with the day smoke rising from chimneys miners trudging toward the silver works that gave the town its name and purpose. Clara pulled the horse to a stop, uncertainty gripping her. She had no plan, no allies, and no idea who Thomas had meant to seek in this den of enemies. Going into town alone was madness, but returning to the mountain to Thomas, if he still lived, meant facing whoever had ambushed them. And with her injuries, she wouldn't survive another night exposed to the elements. As she hesitated, hoofbeats sounded from a side trail. Clara tensed, preparing to flee, when a familiar voice called out, "Hold up there, Miss Blackwood!" Sheriff Jake Hollister emerged from the trees, his chestnut horse moving at an unhurried pace. Blood stained his coat sleeve, fresh blood that hadn't been there during his visit to Thomas's cabin. "Where's Thomas?" Clara demanded, one hand going to the small knife hidden in the folds of her borrowed coat. Jake raised his hands, showing they were empty. "Still breathing, last I saw him. Took a bullet meant for me." He grimaced, flexing his injured arm. "Bastards were waiting for anyone coming down from Thomas's place. Nearly got us both." "Who were they?" "Hired guns, or locals." Jake's eyes narrowed. "The kind of men Judge Maxwell brings in when he wants something done quietly." Clara's suspicion must have shown on her face because Jake sighed heavily. "I know what you're thinking. I wear this badge work for the town for Maxwell, but some things a man can't stomach even for a paycheck." He looked away. "Thomas Garrett saved my life twice now. Figure that earns him the benefit of my doubt." "Where is he?" Clara pressed. "I got him to Doc Miller's place on the edge of town. Old Army surgeon keeps to himself." Jake gestured toward a trail that skirted the main road. "Thomas said to bring you there if I found you. Said to tell you he's calling in his marker." Clara hesitated. This could be a trap, Jake leading her straight to Jeremiah or Maxwell. But if Thomas was injured, possibly dying. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Jake said, reading her thoughts. Hell, I wouldn't in your place. But Thomas needs help, and Doc Miller can only do so much with that shoulder torn up. Decision made, Clara nodded. Lead the way, Sheriff. But know this, if you're lying, if this is a trap, I'll make sure whatever happens to me happens to you first. Jake's mouth quirked in what might have been respect. Thomas said you had fire. Come on, then. And stay off the main roads. Your brother's got half the town looking for you. Doc Samuel Miller had seen his share of bullet wounds more than any man should in one lifetime. From the battlefields of Shiloh to the Apache campaigns, he'd patched together soldiers who by all rights should have died. But seeing Thomas Garrett on his table, blood soaking through hastily applied bandages, hit him differently. "Damn fool," he muttered, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. 20 years in these mountains without incident, then you bring this trouble to my door. Thomas, pale but conscious, managed a weak smile. Missed you too, Doc. The bullet had gone clean through the shoulder, a small mercy. No bone fragments, no major arteries severed. But infection was the real killer in wounds like this, and Thomas had lost blood, too much blood for a man his age. You're lucky, Doc Miller said, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Another inch to the right, we'd be having a different conversation. Wouldn't be having any conversation, Thomas replied, wincing as the alcohol hit raw flesh. Doc Miller worked in silence for a moment, his dark hands steady and sure despite their age. At 65, Samuel Miller was one of the few black men in Silver Creek respected enough to practice his profession openly. His service as a surgeon during the war between the states had earned him that much, at least. The girl, Thomas asked, breaking the silence. No sign yet. Sheriff went looking. Doc Miller tied off a suture. You want to tell me what kind of hornet's nest you've kicked over, because those weren't random outlaws taking pot shots. Those were professional killers. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. John Blackwood's daughter. She has information Judge Maxwell wants. Information about a silver strike. Doc Miller paused in his work. Blackwood, the prospector who supposedly killed himself a few years back. Murdered, Thomas corrected, by his stepson Jeremiah Walsh on Maxwell's orders. Those are dangerous accusations, Thomas. Truth often is. The door opened, admitting a gust of cold air, and two figures, Jake Hollister and a small woman wrapped in a coat much too large for her frame. Clara's eyes immediately found Thomas, widening at the sight of his blood-soaked bandages. You're alive, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. Thomas attempted to sit up, but Doc Miller's firm hand kept him in place. Told you I'm hard to kill, he said to Clara, then nodded to Jake. Appreciate the help, Sheriff. Jake closed the door, checking the windows before speaking. Maxwell's men are combing the mountain. Word is you kidnapped the girl, killed 2 men in the process. That's a lie, Clara protested. Thomas saved me. Those men were trying to kill us both. Truth doesn't matter much in this town anymore, Jake said grimly. Not when Maxwell owns the judge, the newspaper, and half the businesses. He removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. I can't help you openly. Not if I want to keep this badge and my life. Doc Miller finished bandaging Thomas's shoulder. You need rest. That shoulder won't heal if you keep reopening it. Rest isn't a luxury we have, Thomas replied, forcing himself to sit up despite the pain. Not with every gun in the county looking for us. Clara approached the table, her own movements careful and measured from her injuries. This is my fight, not yours. You've done enough, more than anyone could expect. Thomas's dark eyes met hers. I made a choice up on that mountain. I'm seeing it through. Doc Miller looked between them, understanding dawning on his weathered face. "You're going after Maxwell, trying to prove what he did to Blackwood." "The girl has evidence," Thomas confirmed. "A map to the Silver Strike proof of her father's claim. With federal witnesses, it's enough to bring charges." Jake let out a low whistle. "You're talking about taking down the most powerful man in 3 counties. He won't go quietly." "Few tyrants do," Thomas replied. Doc Miller moved to a cabinet, retrieving a bottle of whiskey and 4 glasses. He poured generous measures, passing them around. "If you're set on this madness, you'll need more than evidence. You'll need allies." Thomas took the whiskey, downing it in one swallow. "Got any in mind?" "Martha Wilson might help," Jake suggested. "She owns the hotel downtown. Her husband crossed Maxwell last year, had an accident in the mines a week later." "And Jack Peterson at the newspaper," Doc Miller added. "He still prints the occasional truth when Maxwell's not looking." Clara listened intently, hope kindling for the first time in months. "What about the telegram office? Could we wire the federal marshal in Denver?" Jake shook his head. "Maxwell's man runs the telegraph. Nothing goes out without his knowledge." "Then we need a writer," Thomas said. "Someone who can carry the evidence to Denver if things go wrong." A tense silence fell over the room. The task before them seemed impossible. 4 people against a man who controlled an entire town, who had killers at his command, and the law in his pocket. Doc Miller refilled their glasses. "To lost causes," he said, raising his drink in a toast. "And the fools who champion them." They drank in silence, each contemplating the dangerous path ahead. Outside, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the snow-covered streets of Silver Creek streets that might soon run red with their blood if they failed. Jeremiah Walsh paced Judge Maxwell's office like a caged wolf boots, leaving wet tracks on the expensive carpet. "Your men failed. They had one job: kill Garrett, bring back my sister." Maxwell sat behind his mahogany desk, unperturbed by Jeremiah's agitation. At 55, Ambrose Maxwell cut an imposing figure, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, with the cold eyes of a predator who had long ago lost any pretense of humanity. "Patience, Mr. Walsh," he said, turning a silver nugget over in his manicured hands, identical to the one Clara carried. "Your sister is in town. My sources confirm she's at the Miller residence along with Garrett, and, interestingly, our own Sheriff Hollister." Jeremiah stopped pacing. "Jake, what's his game?" "A good question. One he'll answer shortly." Maxwell set down the nugget. "In the meantime, I've taken precautions. Every road out of Silver Creek is watched. The telegraph office has been instructed to report any unusual messages. Your sister won't escape again. And the map, the claim." Maxwell's thin smile never reached his eyes. "All in good time. Miss Blackwood has proven remarkably resilient to conventional persuasion. Perhaps a more creative approach is needed." Jeremiah's hand went to the knife at his belt, a habit when he was anxious. "Just remember our deal. I deliver Clara and the map. You make me partner in the mine." "Of course," Maxwell agreed smoothly, "though I wonder if your motives are entirely financial. You seem to harbor considerable resentment toward your half-sister." Jeremiah's face darkened. "She was always the favorite. John's precious daughter with her Mexican mother's exotic looks and her father's brains. Even after her mother died, even after my own mother married John and gave him a son, it was always Clara." His knuckles whitened around the knife hilt. "Then he found the silver, told her where it was not me, his own son." "Family dynamics are so fascinating," Maxwell commented, his tone suggesting they were anything but. "Rest assured, Mr. Walsh, you'll have your revenge and your fortune. But first, we need that map." A knock interrupted them. Maxwell's secretary entered, followed by Sheriff Jake Hollister, whose left arm hung in a crude sling. "Sheriff," Maxwell greeted him, eyes noting the blood-stained sleeve. "I understand there was trouble on the mountain." Jake removed his hat, face carefully, neutral. "Ambush, sir. Professional work, not local talent." "How unfortunate. And what were you doing on the mountain, if I might ask?" "Following reports of gunfire," Jake replied smoothly. "Found Thomas Garrett with a bullet in his shoulder. Helped him to Doc Miller's place." Jeremiah stepped forward. "And my sister, was she there?" Jake met his gaze without flinching. "No sign of her. Garrett claims she ran during the ambush. Could be anywhere in these mountains by now." Maxwell studied Jake with the intensity of a man accustomed to detecting lies. "Curious. My sources place Miss Blackwood at the Miller residence not an hour ago." Jake didn't blink. "Your sources are mistaken. I've been with Garrett since the ambush. He's alone." The room fell silent as Maxwell continued his assessment. Finally, he smiled a cold, calculating expression. "I see. Well, these things happen. Misinformation abounds in times of stress." He opened a drawer, removing a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "For your trouble, Sheriff, and for your continued diligence in locating Miss Blackwood." Jake took the pouch without counting its contents. "Thank you, sir. I'll keep looking." "Do that," Maxwell said, his pleasant tone belied by the ice in his eyes. "And Sheriff, remember who pays for that badge you wear." Jake nodded once, replaced his hat, and left without another word. When the door closed behind him, Jeremiah exploded. "He's lying. He knows where Clara is." Maxwell raised a hand, silencing him. "Obviously. The question is, why? What could Thomas Garrett possibly offer that would make Jake Hollister risk everything?" He drummed his fingers on the desk. "No matter. This development, while unexpected, changes nothing." He rose, moving to the window that overlooked Silver Creek's main street. Below, miners trudged through snow toward the silver works that had made Maxwell rich. Women hurried between shops. Children played in the drifts, all going about their lives beneath the shadow of the man who controlled their fates. "Let them think they're safe for now," Maxwell said more to himself than to Jeremiah. "Let them believe they have allies. Options, hope." He turned cold satisfaction in his gaze. "It will make their inevitable failure all the more devastating." Clara watched from Doc Miller's window as dusk settled over Silver Creek. The town transformed in the fading light lamps flickering to life in windows, the saloons growing rowdier as miners finished their shifts. From this distance, it seemed almost peaceful, a haven of civilization in the wilderness. She knew better. Every street, every building, every person down there represented potential danger. Judge Maxwell's influence touched everything like a spider's web, with the judge himself waiting at its center. Behind her, Thomas slept fitfully on Doc's examination table, his wounded shoulder freshly bandaged. Doc Miller had given him laudanum for the pain over Thomas's objections, insisting he needed rest to heal. "You should sleep too," Doc Miller said quietly, joining her at the window. "Those ribs won't mend if you don't rest." Clara shook her head. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see Jeremiah, or Judge Maxwell." "Ghosts are persistent company," Doc agreed. "Carried my own for 30 years. He glanced at Thomas. "Him too. Maybe more than most." "He mentioned Buffalo Soldiers," Clara said. "Said he rode with the 10th Cavalry." Doc Miller's expression softened with memory. "The 10th, yes. One of the finest units in the Army, though you won't hear white officers admit it." Thomas was a sergeant, youngest in the regiment, had a reputation even then. What kind of reputation? The kind that makes men follow you into hell without question. Doc moved to stoke the fire. They called him Widowmaker behind his back. Not for cruelty. Thomas never took pleasure in killing. But when combat came, he had a clarity most men lack. Made him effective, terrifying sometimes. Clara studied the sleeping man with new eyes. What happened? Why is he alone in these mountains? War ended. The army kept some colored troops for the Indian campaigns, but it wasn't the same. Doc's voice grew distant. Thomas married a white woman, Caroline, caused the kind of trouble you'd expect. They moved west to start. Fresh had a daughter. He fell silent, and Clara sensed they approached the heart of Thomas's darkness. What happened to them? She asked softly. Comanche raid, they said, though some whispered it was white men dressed as Indians. Doc shook his head. Thomas was away scouting for the army. Came home to ashes and graves. Clara felt the weight of the tragedy settle over her. And he's been alone since 15 years, near as I can figure. Took to bounty hunting for a while. Disappeared into these mountains about a decade back. Doc glanced at his old friend. Until today, I'd have said Thomas Garrett died with his family. The man who carried that name was just a shadow walking around, waiting to fade. The door opened, admitting Sheriff Jake with an armful of supplies, food, ammunition, and clothing that might fit Clara. Maxwell knows, he announced without preamble. Knows you're here, knows I lied about it. We've got until morning at most before he moves against us. Doc Miller cursed softly. We need more time. Thomas can't travel with that shoulder. Time's the one thing we don't have, Jake replied, setting down his burden. Maxwell's brought in more guns, professional killers from Denver. Streets are crawling with them. Clara moved away from the window, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. What about the federal marshal? Can we get word to Denver? Working on it, Jake said. Martha Wilson's son left at dusk, riding hard for the telegraph station in Georgetown. If he makes it, we might see federal badges in 2 days. If, Doc emphasized. Jake didn't disagree. In the meantime, we need somewhere more defensible than this. Martha's offered rooms at her hotel, back entrance, no records. Moving Thomas is risky, Doc warned. Staying here is suicide, Jake countered. This place will be the first they search when Maxwell makes his move. As they argued, Clara returned to the window, gazing down at the town that had become their battlefield. Movement caught her eye, men gathering outside the sheriff's office, more armed men than Silver Creek should have. Even from this distance, she could tell they weren't locals. Their posture, their weapons, the way they scanned their surroundings, these were professional killers. They're already moving, she interrupted, pointing. Look! Jake joined her, cursing at the sight. That's no search party. That's an execution squad. He checked his revolver. We need to go. Now. I'll prepare a wagon, Doc Miller said, already gathering medical supplies. The back trail leads past the livery. We can be at Martha's before they reach here. Clara crossed to Thomas, gently shaking him awake. His eyes opened immediately, alert, despite the laudanum. They're coming, she said simply. Thomas nodded once, pushing himself upright with a grimace. Then we'd best not be here when they arrive. As they hurriedly gathered supplies, Clara felt the weight of the silver map against her skin. So much bloodshed over a piece of paper and a nugget of metal. Her father's legacy had become a death sentence for anyone who helped her. Outside, the first shouts echoed through the darkening streets, Maxwell's men beginning their hunt. The wagon rattled through Silver Creek's back alleys, each bump sending fresh agony through Thomas's shoulder. He sat beside Doc Miller, who drove with the practiced calm of a man who had evacuated wounded under artillery fire. In the wagon bed, concealed beneath canvas, lay Clara and their meager supplies. "Martha's place is just ahead," Doc murmured, keeping the horses at a walk to avoid attention. "Back entrance leads to a storage room. She's prepared it." Thomas scanned the shadowed streets, every sense alert, despite the laudanum fog. Jake, creating a diversion, said he'd meet us there. They turned down a narrow passage between buildings, approaching the rear of a 3-story structure, the Silver Creek Hotel, one of the few establishments Maxwell didn't control directly. A single lantern illuminated a plain wooden door where a woman waited, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Martha Wilson had the hard eyes of someone who had suffered and survived. She gestured them forward, glancing nervously at the street beyond. "Quickly!" she hissed. "Maxwell's men are everywhere." Doc halted the wagon, and Thomas climbed down, fighting dizziness. He helped Clara from the wagon bed, noting how she moved with the careful precision of someone managing constant pain. Martha ushered them inside through a storeroom stacked with linens and supplies, then up a narrow service staircase to the hotel's 3rd floor. The room she led them to was small but clean, with 2 beds and a window overlooking the back alley. "No one will look for you here," she said, lighting a lamp. "This floor is closed for renovations, my excuse to keep guests away." Thomas eased himself onto a chair, the exertion of their escape having reopened his wound. Fresh blood stained the bandage. "You're risking everything," he said to Martha. "Why?" Martha's face hardened. "Maxwell had my husband killed for refusing to sell this hotel. Claimed it was a mining accident, but Henry hadn't set foot in a mine in 20 years. She straightened, pride evident in her bearing. "I buried a husband. I'll not bury the truth as well." A soft knock interrupted them, 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Martha opened the door to admit Jake, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. "They're searching Doc's place now," he reported. "Finding it empty won't improve their mood." "Did your boy make it out?" Doc asked Martha. "No word yet. If he reached Georgetown, we'll know by morning." She wrung her hands, the only sign of her anxiety. "I should return downstairs before I'm missed. There's food in the cupboard, water in the pitcher. Use the chamber pot, not the hallway facilities." After she left, silence fell over the room. 4 people bound by circumstance, each risking their life for a cause that seemed increasingly desperate. Jake removed his badge, turning it over in his hands. "Won't be wearing this much longer," he said almost to himself. "You could walk away," Thomas offered. "Tell Maxwell you were deceived. Go back to your life." Jake's laugh held no humor. "What life, enforcing the will of a murderer, looking the other way while he bleeds this town dry?" He pinned the badge back on his shirt. "No, I've done that too long already." Clara had been silent, but now she approached Thomas, her face set with determination. "I need to show you something." From beneath her dress, she withdrew a small leather pouch suspended on a silver chain. Opening it carefully, she removed a folded piece of paper and a silver nugget the size of a thumb. "My father's map," she explained, unfolding the paper on the small table. "And proof of the claim." They gathered around as she smoothed the creases. The map was hand-drawn, but detailed, showing landmarks, distances, and a location marked with a simple X. Thomas studied it, recognition dawning on his weathered features. "This is here, in Silver Creek." Clara nodded. "That's why Maxwell hasn't found it despite years of searching. The vein runs directly beneath the town, beneath his own courthouse, in fact. My father discovered it while helping dig the foundation." Jake whistled softly. "No wonder Maxwell wanted this kept quiet." Mining beneath an established town would require evacuating everyone, Thomas finished, paying fair compensation for their homes and businesses. Which Maxwell has no intention of doing, Doc added. Easier to steal the claim work, the mine in secret. Clara traced the route on the map. There's an entrance here through the old Walsh property where I grew up. Jeremiah never knew my father sealed it before he died. Thomas looked up from the map, meeting Clara's gaze. This is worth killing for, he said quietly. Worth dying for, too, if Maxwell has his way. Then we don't give him the chance, Jake said firmly. First light, I'll take the map and ride for Denver myself. Federal marshals can... The window exploded inward, showering them with glass as a flaming bottle smashed against the far wall. Fire spread instantly, hungrily consuming the dry wallpaper. More bottles crashed through, turning the small room into an inferno within seconds. Through the broken window came shouts from the street below. "Burn them out! Don't let them escape!" Thomas grabbed Clara, pulling her toward the door as Jake and Doc kicked at the flames. But when Jake wrenched the door open, black smoke billowed in from the hallway. "They've fired the whole floor!" he shouted above the roar of the flames. They were trapped fire before them, fire behind, and a 3-story drop from the window. Clara clutched the map to her chest, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. In the street below, Maxwell's men waited with rifles raised, ready to shoot anyone who attempted to flee the burning building. Thomas met Jake's eyes across the inferno, a wordless question passing between them. Jake nodded once, drawing his revolver. "Doc, get Clara to the roof," Thomas ordered, his own gun appearing in his hand. "Jake and I will buy you time." "Thomas, no," Clara began, but he cut her off. "The map is what matters. Get it to the federal marshal." His eyes held hers for a moment, dark, determined, alive, in a way Doc Miller hadn't seen in 15 years. "Go, now." As Doc pulled Clara toward a small access hatch in the ceiling, Thomas and Jake took position at the shattered window. Below, Maxwell's men saw them and raised their rifles. The night erupted in gunfire. Flames licked up the hotel walls as Thomas and Jake fired methodically from the shattered window. Below, Maxwell's men scattered for cover, their coordinated attack dissolving into chaos under the precision of 2 former cavalry soldiers who'd faced worse odds in the Apache campaigns. "Just like old times," Jake shouted over the gunfire, ejecting spent cartridges. Thomas didn't answer, his focus absolute. Each shot found its mark, not always killing, but driving the attackers back, creating the window of opportunity they needed. Behind them, Doc Miller had wrenched open the ceiling hatch, helping Clara climb through despite her injured ribs. Smoke billowed up the narrow opening, making each breath a struggle. "Thomas," Clara called back, reluctant to leave him. "Go," he ordered, not turning from the window. "That map's worth more than any of our lives." Doc pulled her through the hatch onto the hotel's flat roof. The night air was bitterly cold after the inferno below, but Clara gulped it gratefully. From this height, she could see all of Silver Creek spread before her, the courthouse, the mines, the small houses where ordinary people slept, unaware of the violence being committed in their midst. And the flames. So many flames. "They've set fires all along the block," Doc said grimly, "creating a perimeter we can't escape." Clara clutched the map tighter. There has to be a way out. Doc scanned the rooftops, his medical bag slung over one shoulder. "Maybe. The buildings are close enough together on this side. If we can make it to the newspaper office, Jack Peterson might help us." A crash from below signaled part of the 3rd floor collapsing. The hotel, though built of brick, had wooden interior floors that fed the hungry flames. "We need to go now," Doc urged. Thomas and Jake won't last much longer in that inferno. Pushing aside her fear, Clara followed Doc across the roof to where a narrow gap separated the hotel from the adjacent building. The jump wasn't far, 6 feet perhaps, but the 3-story drop to the alley below left no margin for error. Doc went first, his aging body protesting but still capable. He landed safely, turning back to encourage Clara. "Don't think about the drop," he called. "Just focus on reaching me." Clara backed up a few steps, ignoring the pain in her ribs. The map secured inside her dress, she ran forward and leaped across the gap. For a terrifying moment, she hung suspended in the cold night air. Then Doc's strong hands caught her, pulling her to safety. "Good girl," he praised. 2 more buildings to cross, then down the fire escape. As they moved across the second rooftop, gunfire erupted again from the hotel. Through a gap between buildings, Clara saw Thomas and Jake emerge onto the hotel roof, exchanging shots with pursuers on the street below. "They made it out," she breathed in relief. "Keep moving," Doc urged. "Best help we can offer is getting that map to safety." They crossed to the third building, the newspaper office, a modest 2-story structure with a printing press visible through the top-floor windows. Doc rapped sharply on the glass. After a tense moment, a middle-aged man with ink-stained hands appeared, his expression changing from annoyance to alarm as he took in their smoke-blackened appearance. He unlocked the window, sliding it open. "Doc Miller! What in God's name—" "No time, Jack. Maxwell's men are burning down half the town trying to kill us." Jack Peterson helped them inside, his eyes widening at the sight of Clara. "Is that Blackwood's girl? The one they're hunting?" "The very same," Doc confirmed. "And she has proof of what Maxwell did to her father." Jack secured the window, drawing the blinds. "You've picked a dangerous time to seek justice, Miss Blackwood. Maxwell's brought in hired guns from as far as Denver." "We've noticed," Clara said dryly. More gunshots echoed from the direction of the hotel, followed by shouts and the ominous sound of crumbling masonry. "Thomas and Jake are still out there," Clara said, moving toward the window. Doc caught her arm. "Nothing we can do for them now, except survive." He turned to Jack. "We need a way out of town. Martha's boy rode for Georgetown, but Maxwell's men will be watching every road." Jack ran a hand through his thinning hair. "There's a supply wagon leaving for the mining camp at dawn. Driver owes me a favor." He glanced at Clara. "But they'll be looking for a woman." Clara understood immediately. "Then they won't find one." Jack nodded approvingly. "I have my son's old clothes in the back. Might fit you well enough in the dark." As Jack went to retrieve the clothes, Clara moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds at the burning hotel. The entire third floor was engulfed now, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like grasping fingers. "There's still good men, you know," Doc said quietly, joining her. "Thomas and Jake. Despite everything life's thrown at them." Clara nodded, throat tight with unshed tears. "I've brought them nothing but trouble." "Trouble finds men like that regardless," Doc replied. "But purpose, true purpose, that's rarer." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Whatever happens, you gave Thomas something he lost long ago. A reason to live rather than just survive." Clara had no answer for that. She watched the hotel burn, wondering if Thomas Garrett had found his purpose only to lose his life in the same night. Thomas and Jake crouched behind a chimney stack on the hotel roof, reloading their weapons as bullets chipped brick around them. The fire had driven them upward, but Maxwell's men had adjusted quickly, positioning shooters in surrounding buildings. "Quite the welcome party," Jake commented, wincing as a bullet struck inches from his head. Maxwell must really want that map. Thomas checked his ammunition, 4 rounds left in the Colt, none for the Winchester. Any ideas for getting out of this mess? Jake peered around the chimney, ducking back as shots rang out. See that water tower on the mercantile roof? If we can reach it, there's a maintenance ladder down to the alley. Thomas assessed the distance, at least 30 feet across open space with a jump between buildings. That's a lot of ground to cover under fire. Got a better idea. A section of the hotel roof collapsed, inward flames shooting upward through the new opening. Their shelter was disappearing by the minute. No, Thomas admitted. Ladies first, Sheriff. Jake's teeth flashed white in his smoke-darkened face. Age before beauty, Sergeant. Thomas allowed himself a grim smile. Then, in a single fluid movement, he broke from cover and sprinted across the roof. Bullets kicked up shingles around him as Maxwell's men adjusted their aim, but years of mountain living had kept Thomas fast despite his age. He leaped across the gap between buildings, landing hard and rolling to absorb the impact. Fresh pain exploded in his wounded shoulder, but he pushed it aside, taking cover behind a ventilation shaft. Your turn, he called to Jake. The sheriff didn't hesitate. He burst from behind the chimney, zigzagging as he ran. Halfway across, a bullet caught him in the leg, sending him stumbling. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he wouldn't make the jump. Then Jake hurled himself forward with desperate strength, clearing the gap by inches. Thomas lunged, grabbing his outstretched hand and pulling him to safety. Just a graze, Jake gasped, though blood darkened his pant leg. Sure it is, Thomas replied, helping him toward the water tower. And I'm just a little winded. They reached the tower as the hotel's roof fully collapsed, sending a column of sparks into the night sky. The maintenance ladder was where Jake remembered a narrow metal rungs leading down the side of the mercantile to the alley below. You first, Thomas insisted. That leg won't hold long. Jake didn't argue, holstering his revolver and beginning the climb down. Thomas followed his wounded shoulder, screaming with each movement. Above them, Maxwell's men had realized their escape route and were repositioning, but the water tower provided temporary cover. They were halfway down when Jake suddenly stopped. Problem, he said tersely. Thomas glanced down to see 3 armed men waiting in the alley below, rifles aimed upward. Nowhere to go, Sheriff, one called up. Judge Maxwell wants a word. Jake looked up at Thomas, resignation in his eyes. Seems we're out of options. Not quite, Thomas replied, his gaze shifting to something beyond Jake's shoulder. Before Jake could respond, a shotgun blast roared through the alley, dropping one of the gunmen. The others whirled, firing blindly toward the sound. Get down here, a woman's voice commanded. Martha Wilson stood at the mouth of the alley, a smoking shotgun in her hands. She fired again, forcing the remaining gunmen to scatter. Jake and Thomas needed no further encouragement. They descended rapidly, Thomas nearly falling as his strength ebbed. Jake caught him, supporting his weight, as they staggered toward Martha. This way, she urged, leading them through a service entrance into the back of a saloon. Inside, the piano played, and men drank, oblivious to the violence outside. Martha guided them through the kitchen and into a small office, locking the door behind them. Only then did Thomas allow himself to sink into a chair, his reserves finally exhausted. Doc and the girl, he asked, voice hoarse from smoke. Made it to the newspaper office, Martha confirmed, examining Jake's leg. Jack Peterson's helping them leave town at dawn. Relief washed through Thomas. The map. Safe with Clara, Jake said, wincing as Martha cleaned his wound. If she reaches Denver, Maxwell's finished. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Good. Martha finished bandaging Jake's leg, then turned her attention to Thomas's shoulder. The bandages Doc had applied were soaked through with blood, the wound reopened during their escape. "You need a doctor," she said bluntly. "What I need is to get out of Silver Creek," Thomas replied. "Maxwell won't stop hunting us." Martha hesitated, then reached into her pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. "I received this by messenger an hour ago, from my son in Georgetown." She handed it to Jake, who read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "The federal marshal won't come," Jake said bitterly. "Maxwell's got friends in Denver, powerful ones. They're claiming this is a local matter, not federal jurisdiction." The news hit Thomas like a physical blow. Everything they'd risked the lives already lost, all for nothing, if the law wouldn't intervene. "There's more," Martha said quietly. "Judge Maxwell has called a town meeting for noon tomorrow. He's going to publicly charge you both with arson, murder, and kidnapping. With no federal oversight. It'll be a lynching, not a trial," Jake finished. Silence fell over the small office. Outside, they could hear the fire wagons finally responding to the hotel blaze, too late to save the building. "We need to get Clara and that map out of Colorado," Thomas said finally. "To a jurisdiction beyond Maxwell's reach." "Wyoming, maybe," Jake suggested. "Or New Mexico territory." Martha shook her head. "Every road, every trail will be watched. The girl wouldn't make it 10 miles. Thomas leaned forward despite the pain. "Then we don't use the roads. We go where Maxwell's men can't follow." Jake's eyes widened with understanding. "The mine." Clara's map. Thomas nodded. "If her father found a silver vein beneath the town, there must be tunnels, old workings that could lead us out." "To where?" Martha asked. "The abandoned Ghost Creek settlement," Thomas said. 5 miles south. Close enough to reach through connected tunnels, far enough that Maxwell won't think to look there." Jake considered this. "It's risky. Those old tunnels could be collapsed, flooded." "You have a better plan," Thomas challenged. After a moment, Jake shook his head. "No, but we'll need supplies, lanterns, and someone who knows the underground workings." Martha straightened, decision made. "I'll get what you need. And I know who can help you, Henry Cole. Worked the mines 40 years before Maxwell arrived. If anyone knows the old tunnels, it's him." She moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "What about Doc and Clara? They're expecting to leave by wagon at dawn." "Get word to Jack Peterson," Thomas instructed. "Tell them to meet us at the old Walsh cabin at midnight tomorrow. It's where Clara lived and, according to her map, where the mine entrance is hidden." As Martha slipped out, Jake turned to Thomas. "You're betting everything on that map being accurate." "I'm betting on Clara," Thomas corrected. "Everything else is just details." Jake studied his old friend in the dim lamplight. "You know, when I found you on that mountain, I thought you were just a shell. A man who'd lost everything that mattered." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Maybe I was." "And now?" Before Thomas could answer, a commotion erupted in the saloon outside, raised voices, the crash of overturned furniture. "They're here," Jake said, drawing his revolver. "Maxwell's men." Thomas forced himself to his feet, ignoring the protest from his wounded body. "Back door. Leads to an alley, then the livery." Jake moved to position himself beside the door. "I'll hold them here. Buy you time." Thomas shook his head. "Not happening. We go together or not at all." Jake's expression hardened. "Don't be a fool, Thomas. You can barely stand. Someone has to slow them down." Before Thomas could argue further, the office door splintered beneath a heavy boot. Jake shoved Thomas toward the back exit, then turned to face the intruders, gun raised. "Evening, gentlemen," Jake said calmly. "You're disturbing the peace." Thomas had no choice but to retreat through the back door as gunfire erupted behind him. The alley beyond was dark and narrow, leading toward the livery stables, where horses might offer escape. He made it halfway before a figure stepped from the shadows blocking his path. "Hello, Thomas," Jeremiah Walsh said, leveling a revolver at his chest. "Been looking for you." Thomas froze, assessing his options. His own gun was empty, his strength fading. Behind him, the gunfire in the office had stopped. Whether that meant Jake was dead or captured, he couldn't know. "Where's my sister?" Jeremiah demanded. "Safe from you," Thomas replied, "which is all that matters." Jeremiah's face twisted with rage. "You have no idea what matters. That bitch has something that belongs to me, my birthright, my father's legacy." "John Blackwood wasn't your father," Thomas said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "Was he?" Something flickered in Jeremiah's eyes. Surprise, then cold fury. "My mother married him when I was 2. He raised me, made me his son in every way that counts." Then Clara came along, his precious daughter, with her Mexican whore of a mother. Thomas noted the raw hatred in Jeremiah's voice, the way his hand trembled slightly on the gun. This wasn't just about silver or money. This was something deeper, more primal. "He never loved you," Thomas guessed. "Not like he loved her." "He told her where to find the silver." Jeremiah spat. His own son standing right there, and he whispered the secret to her. Then made me swear to protect her. He laughed bitterly. "Fat lot of good that did him." "So you killed him," Thomas said flatly. "For Maxwell, for money." Jeremiah stepped closer, pressing the gun against Thomas's chest. "For justice. Everything Clara had should have been mine. Including the beating, the broken ribs. She needed discipline. Always thought she was better than everyone. Better than me too." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "Now you're going to tell me where she is, or I'll put a bullet through your heart." Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "Then you'll never find her. Or the map." Indecision flickered across Jeremiah's face. Killing Thomas meant losing his best lead to Clara, but letting him live was dangerous in its own way. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then a new voice spoke from the shadows behind Jeremiah. "Drop the gun, Walsh." Jeremiah stiffened as cold metal pressed against the back of his head. Jack Peterson stepped into the dim light, his printer's hands steady on the revolver he held. "I said drop it." After a tense moment, Jeremiah lowered his weapon. "The newspaper man. Didn't think you had the stomach for this kind of work." "I've watched Maxwell and men like you destroy this town for years," Jack replied. "Printed the lies he told me to print. Not anymore." Thomas straightened, relief washing through him. "Jake, dead," Jack said grimly. "Took 3 of Maxwell's men with him." The news hit Thomas like a physical blow. Another friend lost another debt he could never repay. "Clara Dock?" he asked. "Safe for now, but Maxwell's got the town locked down tight. No one in or out without his say-so." Thomas nodded, processing this. "We need to get to the old Walsh cabin. Tonight, not tomorrow." "Why?" Jack asked, keeping his gun trained on Jeremiah. "Because our plan just changed." Thomas replied, his gaze hard on Jeremiah. "And we're taking him with us." Jeremiah laughed, the sound edged with desperation. "You think I'll help you? Maxwell will skin me alive." "Maxwell will never know," Thomas said coldly, "because as far as he's concerned, you'll be hunting Clara in the mountains." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "And if you don't help us, I'll personally deliver you to the Ute tribe up north. Tell them you were part of the raiding party that killed their women last spring." The blood drained from Jeremiah's face. "That wasn't me. That was Maxwell's men." "They won't know the difference," Thomas replied. and they have ways of dying that make a bullet seem merciful. Fear replaced the arrogance in Jeremiah's eyes. He swallowed hard, then nodded once. "What do you want me to do?" Clara paced the small back room of the newspaper office, unable to rest despite her exhaustion. Every sound from the street made her tense, expecting Maxwell's men to break down the door at any moment. Doc Miller watched her from where he sat, examining Jack Peterson's small medical library. "You should try to sleep," he advised. "Tomorrow will test us all." "I can't," Clara replied, not knowing if Thomas and Jake made it out of that fire. Doc set aside the book he'd been reading. "Thomas Garrett has survived worse than fire. As for Jake," he shrugged, "the man's half coyote, too stubborn to die easy." Clara touched the pouch hanging beneath her borrowed clothes boy's trousers and a shirt far too large with a cap to hide her long hair. All this for a map, for silver that's caused nothing but death. "Not for silver," Doc corrected gently, "for justice, for truth, the things your father valued above wealth." A soft knock interrupted them, a pattern they recognized as Jack Peterson's signal. Clara tensed as the door opened, then sagged with relief at the sight of the newspaper man. But her relief turned to ice when she saw who stood behind him, Thomas pale and bloody, supported by none other than Jeremiah Walsh. Clara backed away instinctively, fear a living thing in her chest. "What is he doing here?" "It's all right," Thomas said, his voice weaker than she'd ever heard it. "He's our ticket out of Silver Creek." "He tried to kill me," Clara protested. "He killed our father." Jeremiah's eyes met hers, hatred still visible beneath the fear. "Hello, sister." Doc Miller intervened, helping Thomas to a chair. "Whatever's happening, explanations can wait. This man needs medical attention now." As Doc examined Thomas's reopened wound, Jack Peterson explained the situation, Jake's death, the town lockdown, the change in plans. "We go tonight," he finished, "using the old mine tunnels beneath the Walsh cabin. Jeremiah knows the way." Clara stared at her half-brother, disbelief warring with rage. "And you trust him? He'll lead us straight to Maxwell." "No, he won't," Thomas said with quiet certainty. "Because he knows what happens if he betrays us." Something in Thomas's tone silenced further argument. Clara recognized the man Doc had described earlier, the widowmaker capable of terrible effectiveness when needed. "The map," Thomas continued, gesturing weakly. "Show Jeremiah." Reluctantly, Clara removed the leather pouch, withdrawing the folded paper. She placed it on the table where all could see, but kept her distance from Jeremiah. Her half-brother studied the crude drawing, recognition dawning on his features. "The root cellar," he murmured. "All this time it was beneath the damn root cellar." "You know the entrance?" Jack asked. Jeremiah nodded slowly. "Pa John sealed it up years ago. Said the old tunnels were dangerous." At his laugh held no humor. "And all the while, he was hiding a fortune down there." Doc finished rebandaging Thomas's shoulder. "He's lost too much blood. Moving him is risky. Staying is certain death," Thomas replied. "For all of us." No one could argue with that truth. The flames from the hotel fire had died down, but the hunt for them would only intensify with daylight. "We leave in 1 hour," Thomas decided. "Jack, can you create a diversion? Something to draw attention away from the north side of town." The newspaper man nodded. "The printing press runs on coal oil, highly flammable." "You'd burn your own business?" Clara asked. Jack's expression hardened. "Maxwell's been trying to shut me down for years. At least this way it serves a purpose." As they gathered supplies and finalized plans, Clara found herself watching Jeremiah, the brother, who had become her tormentor. He caught her gaze, his own unreadable. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly, so only she could hear. Not at first. You broke my ribs, she replied coldly, after you killed our father. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. He was never going to give us a chance, either of us. Maxwell offered a way out. A way out, Clara repeated incredulously. He turned you into a murderer. I was already a murderer. Jeremiah said, his voice dropping further. The war saw to that, just like your friend Thomas. Before Clara could respond, Thomas himself approached, moving with the careful precision of a badly wounded man conserving strength. Time to go, he said simply. They gathered at the back door, 5 unlikely allies bound by circumstance, and the common enemy that ruled Silver Creek. Jack would create his diversion, then meet them at the Walsh cabin. Doc would guide Thomas, whose strength was failing despite his iron will. Clara and Jeremiah would lead the way, the sister who had fled and the brother who had hunted her now forced into an uneasy truce. As they prepared to step into the night, Clara found Thomas watching her, his dark eyes holding something she couldn't name. I'm sorry about Jake, she said softly. Thomas nodded once, the grief evident beneath his stoic exterior. He died a free man, made his own choice. His gaze shifted to Jeremiah, then back to Clara. That's all any of us can hope for. With those words hanging in the air, they slipped into the darkness of Silver Creek's streets, heading toward a mine entrance hidden for years, and whatever lay beyond, whether escape or entombment. Behind them, the first flames began to lick at the newspaper office, Jack Peterson's final headline written in fire against the night sky. The Walsh cabin stood dark against the night sky, a silhouette of broken dreams on the edge of Silver Creek. Clara approached it with leaden steps, memories flooding back with each foot of ground covered. Here she had played as a child, here she had mourned her mother, here her father had died, and here Jeremiah had shown her the meaning of true fear. Home sweet home, Jeremiah muttered beside her, his wrists bound with rope, a precaution Thomas had insisted upon, despite his protests. Clara said nothing, scanning the surrounding woods for signs of Maxwell's men. Behind them, Thomas and Doc followed at a careful distance, Thomas moving with the deliberate focus of a man fighting to stay conscious. The town glowed faintly to the south, where Jack Peterson's diversion, the burning newspaper office, had drawn attention away from their escape. It looks clear, she reported, turning back to Thomas. He nodded, gesturing for Jeremiah to lead the way. The root cellar. Show us. Jeremiah hesitated, something unreadable flashing across his face. Then he moved toward the cabin's rear, where a slanted door led to the underground storage space. It took both Clara and Doc to wrench it open, the hinges stiff with disuse. There, Jeremiah said, pointing to the earthen back wall, behind those shelves. Doc held up a lantern, illuminating rows of empty preserving jars and abandoned tools. I don't see an entrance. Because it's hidden, you fool, Jeremiah snapped. Move the shelves. Clara and Doc wrestled the heavy wooden shelving unit aside, revealing a section of wall that looked no different from the rest, packed earth and stone. Unremarkable. There's nothing here, Clara said, suspicion rising. He's lying. Thomas stepped forward, his keen eyes examining the wall. No, he said after a moment. Look at the mortar between these stones. Different color, newer. He pressed against various stones until one shifted slightly. With Doc's help, they removed it, revealing a small cavity containing a metal lever. Your father was thorough, Thomas remarked, reaching for the lever. Wait, Jeremiah interrupted. There's a sequence. Pull it wrong, and the whole tunnel entrance collapses. When everyone stared at him, he added defensively, I watched him build it. 3 pulls. Short, long, short. Thomas studied Jeremiah's face, searching for deception. After a moment, he nodded. "Show us." With his bound hands, Jeremiah demonstrated the pattern. The mechanism responded with a grinding sound, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. "I'll be damned," Doc whispered. "It really exists." The tunnel entrance was narrow, but tall enough to stand in, shored up with timber supports that had weathered the years surprisingly well. The air that flowed from it was cool and damp, carrying the mineral scent of earth and stone. "How far does it go?" Thomas asked, directing the question at Jeremiah. "No idea. Never been inside. Pa sealed it up before I had the chance to explore." Jeremiah's expression darkened. "Another secret he kept from me." Clara felt a strange pang at the bitterness in her half-brother's voice. For all his cruelty, there was something almost childlike in his resentment, a boy forever seeking approval from a father who had looked elsewhere. Thomas checked his pocket watch. "Jack should be here soon. We wait 10 minutes, no more." They gathered what supplies they could from the abandoned cabin, an old lantern, some rope, a rusted pickaxe that might serve as a weapon. Clara found herself in what had been her bedroom, now stripped of anything valuable, the small window where she had once watched stars, now boarded over. "He kept it, you know." She turned to find Jeremiah in the doorway, watching her with that unreadable expression. "Kept what?" "Your room, after you ran the first time. Wouldn't let anyone touch it." Jeremiah leaned against the doorframe, bound hands awkward before him. "Used to find him in here sometimes, just sitting on your bed, staring at nothing." Clara didn't want to hear this, didn't want anything that might humanize the monster her brother had become. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I hated you for it," Jeremiah said simply. "Even when you were gone, it was always Clara, this Clara that. His precious daughter." He straightened. "I wanted him to love me like that. Just once." Before Clara could respond, footsteps sounded from the main room. Thomas calling them back. The moment of almost connection shattered, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. When they returned, Jack Peterson had arrived breathless and spattered with soot from his burning newspaper office. "Maxwell's men are searching the North Road," he reported. "They'll be here within the hour." Thomas nodded, his face ashen in the lantern light. "Then we go now. Jeremiah leads since he knows the tunnel. I'll take rear guard." "You can barely stand," Doc protested. "Which is why I'm in back," Thomas replied with grim humor. "If I fall, the rest of you keep going." No one laughed. The prospect of entering the abandoned mine tunnels was daunting enough. The thought of doing so without Thomas was unthinkable. They gathered at the entrance, 5 disparate souls united by circumstance and the common enemy that hunted them. Jack lit additional lanterns, passing them around. Jeremiah's bonds were loosened enough to allow him to navigate the tunnel, but kept secure enough to prevent escape. "Remember," Thomas said, addressing them all, but looking at Clara. "The map is what matters. It reaches Denver, Maxwell faces justice. Everything else is secondary." Clara met his gaze, understanding the unspoken message. If sacrifices had to be made, the map and the justice it represented came first. With a final glance at the cabin that had housed so much pain, Clara followed the others into the earth's dark embrace. Judge Ambrose Maxwell stood on the steps of the Silver Creek Courthouse, watching as dawn broke over the smoldering remains of what had been the town's newspaper office. Around him, men moved with purpose. His men hired guns, answering to no law but the money he paid them. "No sign of them, sir," reported a lean man with a face scarred by smallpox. "Newspaper man's gone too. Maxwell's expression remained impassive, though rage boiled beneath the surface. "And Sheriff Hollister, dead like you ordered, found him in the saloon back room." A flicker of satisfaction tempered Maxwell's anger. At least something had gone according to plan. "What about Walsh?" The scarred man shifted uncomfortably. "No sign of him either. Last seen near the livery, then nothing." This was more troubling. Jeremiah Walsh was many things: violent, impulsive, weak-willed, but he was also predictable in his greed and ambition. His disappearance suggested complications. "Sir," the man ventured, "with the girl gone and the map with her." "The map is worthless without the girl to verify it," Maxwell interrupted. "And they're still in my town. I can feel it." He turned to face his hired gun. "Search the Walsh cabin again, every inch. They'll go where they think is safe." As the man departed to carry out his orders, Maxwell allowed himself a moment of contemplation. 20 years he had spent building his empire in Silver Creek. 20 years of carefully cultivated power of strategic marriages and convenient deaths of bribes and threats and midnight arrangements. All of it now threatened by a girl with a map and an aging ex-soldier with a conscience. The irony was not lost on him. For years he had searched for John Blackwood's silver strike, convinced it lay somewhere in the hills surrounding Silver Creek. Never once had he considered it might be beneath the town itself. A rider approached at a gallop, pulling to a hard stop before the courthouse steps. "Judge Maxwell fire at the Walsh cabin." Maxwell's attention snapped back to the present. "What kind of fire?" "Started small, but it's spreading fast. North winds pushing it toward town." A cold smile spread across Maxwell's features. "How convenient. Gather the men. We've just found our fugitives." The mine tunnel stretched before them like a throat, swallowing the weak light of their lanterns. They moved in single file, Jeremiah leading, followed by Clara, then Jack and Doc, with Thomas bringing up the rear. The passage was narrow in places, requiring them to turn sideways, then widening into chambers where supporting timbers creaked ominously overhead. "How old are these tunnels?" Jack asked, his voice echoing strangely. "Spanish work originally," Jeremiah replied. "Then Mexican, then American. Been digging here for 200 years. The thought was sobering. Generations of men had lived and died, extracting wealth from these dark veins, their forgotten labor now serving as an escape route. They had been walking for nearly an hour, the tunnel gradually sloping downward when they reached a junction. 3 passages branched from the main tunnel, each disappearing into darkness. Jeremiah halted, studying the options. This wasn't on the map. "Which way?" Thomas asked from the rear, his voice weaker than before. "I don't know," Jeremiah admitted. "These tunnels could go for miles." Clara unfolded her father's map, holding it close to the lantern. The crude drawing showed only a single tunnel leading from the cabin, then connecting to what appeared to be a larger shaft that ran beneath the town. "There," she said, pointing to a small mark her father had made. "This symbol, it's the same as the one carved there." She indicated a faded design cut into the rock wall, a crude arrow pointing to the rightmost passage. "Trail markers," Thomas said approvingly. "Your father left breadcrumbs." They followed the right passage, moving deeper into the earth. The air grew heavier, the walls slick with moisture. Occasionally they passed side tunnels. Some collapsed, others extending into impenetrable darkness. "Stop," Doc called suddenly. "Listen." They froze, straining to hear whatever had caught Doc's attention. At first there was only silence and the soft hiss of their lanterns. Then Clara heard it, a distant rumble like thunder underground. "What is that?" she whispered. "Trouble," Thomas replied grimly. "Move, now." They quickened their pace, the rumbling growing louder behind them. The tunnel floor began to vibrate beneath their feet. "Cave in," Jeremiah said, real fear in his voice. "The old supports must be giving way." "Or someone's helping them along," Thomas added. The implication was clear. Maxwell had found the tunnel entrance and was collapsing it behind them, either to bury them alive or force them forward into whatever lay ahead. They broke into a run, Jeremiah leading them through a maze of passages, following Clara's directions whenever they encountered more of her father's markers. The rumbling pursued them, growing louder with each passing minute. The tunnel abruptly widened into a large chamber, the ceiling supported by massive timber beams. Ancient mining equipment lay, abandoned ore carts, picks, shovels, the detritus of long-dead industry. "We need to rest," Doc insisted, noting Thomas's pallor. "Just for a moment." They paused in the chamber, Thomas sinking gratefully onto an overturned cart. The rumbling had faded somewhat, giving them a temporary reprieve. Clara studied her map in the lantern light. "We should be directly beneath Silver Creek by now. The courthouse can't be far." "And then what?" Jack asked. "We can't exactly surface in the middle of town." "Ghost Creek," Thomas reminded them. "The old settlement. The tunnels should connect to it." Clara frowned at the map. "There's nothing marked beyond this point. Just this symbol here." She pointed to a crude drawing that resembled a pitchfork. "The Devil's Fork," Jeremiah said unexpectedly. Everyone turned to him and he shrugged. "Old miner's legend. 3 tunnels that meet beneath the richest vein. One leads to safety, one to water, one to hell." "Comforting," Jack muttered. Thomas pushed himself upright, fighting a wave of dizziness. "Legends usually have some basis, in fact. The Devil's Fork could be a major junction." Before they could discuss further, the rumbling returned louder, closer, shaking dust from the chamber ceiling. "They're getting closer," Doc warned. They gathered their meager supplies, preparing to move on, when a crack like a rifle shot split the air. One of the main support beams had fractured, sending splinters flying. "Run!" Thomas shouted, as more beams began to give way. They bolted toward the tunnel on the far side of the chamber, even as the ceiling started to collapse behind them. Rock and timber crashed down, filling the air with choking dust. Clara stumbled her injured ribs, sending lances of pain through her chest. She felt a hand grab her arm, pulling her forward, Jeremiah surprisingly strong despite his bound wrists. "Move, damn you!" he yelled above the din. They cleared the chamber just as the roof gave way completely, a wall of debris sealing the passage behind them. When the dust settled, they found themselves in yet another tunnel, this one wider and more recently worked than those they had traversed. "Is everyone all right?" Thomas called, coughing in the dusty air. They took stock. Jack had a gash on his forehead. Doc was wheezing from the dust, and Thomas looked ready to collapse. But they had all survived. "That was no natural cave-in," Jack said, wiping blood from his brow. "That was deliberate." "Maxwell," Clara confirmed. "He's driving us forward like cattle to slaughter." Thomas nodded, his expression grim. "He knows where we're headed, which means we need a new plan." "What plan?" Jeremiah demanded. "We're trapped underground, with no way back." "Then we go forward," Thomas replied, "but not to Ghost Creek. Maxwell will have men waiting there too." Clara studied the new tunnel they found themselves in. Unlike the old Spanish workings, this one showed signs of recent activity. Newer support beams, iron rail tracks for ore carts, even electric lighting wires strung along the walls, though no current flowed through them. This is an active mine," she realized. "Recently worked." Jeremiah's face changed, understanding dawning. "Maxwell's secret operation. He's been mining the silver vein all along right beneath the town. Small scale, kept quiet. The implications were staggering. For years, Maxwell had been extracting silver in secret while publicly maintaining that John Blackwood's strike was merely a prospector's fantasy. "That's why he needed your map," Thomas said to Clara. "Not to find the silver he already knew where it was, but to make sure no one else could prove it existed." Clara felt cold fury building within her. "He killed my father for nothing. He already had the silver." "Not for nothing," Jeremiah corrected, surprising them all. "For everything. With your father's claim validated, half the profits would have gone to you. The rightful owner." A distant sound interrupted their conversation, voices echoing through the tunnels accompanied by the glow of approaching lanterns. "Maxwell's men," Jack whispered. "They must have another entrance." Thomas scanned their surroundings, tactical mind working, despite his weakened state. His gaze settled on a line of ore carts sitting on the rails. "Everyone in," he ordered. "Now." They scrambled into one of the larger carts, crouching low to avoid being seen. Thomas checked that the brake lever was disengaged, then put his shoulder against the cart. "The track slopes downward," he explained. "Gravity will do the rest." With a strength born of desperation, Thomas pushed. The cart resisted, then began to move slowly at first, then gathering speed as it rolled downhill along the rails. Thomas leapt aboard as it gained momentum, nearly falling as his wounded shoulder gave way. Clara caught him, pulling him into the relative safety of the cart. Behind them, shouts of alarm echoed as Maxwell's men spotted the moving vehicle. The cart hurtled through the tunnel, picking up speed with each passing second. Wind rushed past them, the lantern light barely illuminating the track ahead. They clung to each other, and the cart's sides as it bounced and swayed along the uneven rails. "There's a fork ahead," Jeremiah shouted, pointing to where the track split in 3 directions. "The Devil's Fork, the legend made real." "Which way?" Jack yelled as they hurtled toward the junction. Clara frantically consulted her map, but in the dim light and bouncing cart, it was impossible to read. "I don't know." "Left," Thomas ordered. "The left track slopes up slightly, the others go down." "Down leads out," Jeremiah argued. "Down leads to flooding," Thomas countered. "Old mines always flood at the lowest levels." They had seconds to decide. Jack leaned out, reaching for the switch lever that would determine their path. The cart was moving too fast, the lever just beyond his grasp. In a desperate lunge, Jack caught the lever, wrenching it toward the left track. The switch moved, but not in time. The cart hit the junction at full speed, wheels catching on the partially moved switch. For one heart-stopping moment, the cart balanced on 2 wheels, threatening to overturn. Then it slammed back down, careening wildly onto the left track. The impact threw Jack from the cart. He hit the ground hard, rolling as the cart continued its headlong rush into darkness. "Jack!" Clara screamed, watching helplessly as their friend disappeared from view. There was no time to stop, no way to go back. The cart raced onward, carrying the 4 remaining fugitives deeper into the Earth's embrace. Behind them, gunshots echoed Maxwell's men, firing blindly at the fleeing cart. They rounded a bend, and the gunfire faded, replaced by the rumble of wheels on iron and the rush of air. The track began to level out, the cart gradually losing momentum until it finally rolled to a stop in a large, well-constructed chamber. Unlike the abandoned sections they had traversed, this area showed signs of current use: electric lights mounted on walls, though currently dark, steel support beams rather than timber, and most significantly, crates stamped with Maxwell Mining Company logos. "This is it," Clara breathed, climbing from the cart. "The main operation, Maxwell's secret silver mine." Thomas joined her, examining the nearest crate. Not just silver, he said, prying open the lid to reveal dynamite neatly packed in straw. Explosives, enough to bring down half the mountain. Doc Miller surveyed the chamber with professional interest. Those support beams they're holding up more than the tunnel roof. I'd wager the courthouse foundation sits directly above us. The significance wasn't lost on any of them. Maxwell had been literally undermining the town, extracting wealth, while putting the entire community at risk. We need to document this, Thomas decided. Evidence to take to the federal authorities. Clara nodded, already searching for paper and pencil among the mining supplies. Records, shipping manifests, anything with Maxwell's signature. As they searched, Jeremiah stood apart, his expression troubled. You know he'll kill everyone in this tunnel, including his own men, before he lets this discovery go public. Then we'd better work fast, Thomas replied, though the effort of speaking now visibly taxed him. His wounded shoulder had begun bleeding again, the bandage soaked through. You need to rest, Doc insisted, guiding Thomas to a makeshift bench. No time, Thomas protested weakly. Make time, Doc countered. You're no good to anyone dead. While Doc tended to Thomas, Clara and Jeremiah continued searching the chamber. In a small office area, Clara found what they needed, ledgers documenting years of secret silver extraction, with profits diverted to accounts in Maxwell's name. More damning, still correspondence between Maxwell and officials in Denver detailing bribes paid to keep federal inspectors away from Silver Creek. This is it, she said, gathering the most incriminating documents. Everything we need to destroy him. Jeremiah examined the papers over her shoulder, his expression hardening. There's my name and my signature. He pointed to an order authorizing payment to J. Walsh for special services rendered on the date of John Blackwood's death. Clara met her half-brother's gaze. For once, there was no hatred there, only a weary resignation. I didn't know what I was signing, he said quietly. Maxwell told me it was a mining claim. I was drunk, celebrating my new partnership. His laugh was hollow. Turns out, I was signing my confession to murder. Before Clara could respond, Thomas called them back to the main chamber. Someone's coming, not from the direction we came from further in. They doused their lanterns, retreating to the shadows behind stacked crates. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the glow of a single lamp. A figure emerged from a tunnel on the far side of the chamber. Jack Peterson, limping but very much alive, his face streaked with dirt and blood. Jack, Clara called, relief washing through her. The newspaper man whirled, lantern raised, then sagged with relief at the sight of familiar faces. Thank God, I thought I was alone down here. How did you find us? Thomas asked. Followed the tracks as best I could. Got lucky at a junction. Jack set down his lantern, wincing as he favored his injured leg. But we've got bigger problems. I found another way out, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading up. It comes out behind the courthouse. Perfect, Thomas said. We can surface right in town, find a horse ride for Denver. Jack shook his head grimly. Not perfect. Maxwell's up there with at least 20 armed men. They're searching every building, every cellar, and they've got Doc Miller's assistant. Doc's head snapped up. Samuel, what do they want with him? Information, Jack replied. They're persuading him to talk. I could hear the screams from the shaft. The news hit them like a physical blow. Maxwell was torturing an innocent man to find them. We have to help him, Doc insisted. How? Jeremiah demanded. There are 5 of us, 1 badly wounded, against 20 professional killers. We'd be dead before we fired a second shot. So we just leave him to die, Clara challenged. Better one than all, Jeremiah replied coldly. Thomas had been silent, his tactical mind working despite his weakened state. We don't have to fight them directly. he said finally. "This chamber is full of dynamite. The support beams hold up the courthouse foundation." Understanding dawned on their faces, all except Jeremiah, who looked horrified. "You're talking about bringing down the courthouse with Maxwell inside," he asked. "That's murder." "That's justice," Thomas corrected. "And a distraction. While they're dealing with the collapse, we can get to Doc's assistant and escape in the chaos." Clara studied Thomas, seeing the soldier he had once been calculating, ruthless when necessary, but never cruel. "How would we do it?" Thomas gestured to the crates of explosives. "Set charges on the main support beams, timer fuses. Give ourselves enough time to reach the shaft Jack found, get to the surface, find the assistant, and clear the area before detonation." "And if innocent people are in the courthouse," Jeremiah pressed. "It's Sunday," Jack pointed out. "The courthouse is closed except for Maxwell's operation." Killings fell as they weighed the moral implications. They would be destroying public property, potentially killing Maxwell and his men. But they would also be stopping a murderer who had terrorized Silver Creek for years, who even now was torturing an innocent man. "I'll do it," Clara said finally. "This began with my father. It should end with me." Thomas shook his head. "You need to get the evidence to Denver. I'll set the charges." "You can barely stand," Doc objected. "Then help me stand," Thomas replied simply. "But this is my fight, too. Has been since I found Clara on that mountain." The determination in his voice silenced further argument. They began gathering what they needed: dynamite, fuses, matches. Jack sketched a rough map of the route to the vertical shaft and the building where Doc's assistant was being held. As they worked, Clara found herself beside Jeremiah, who was uncharacteristically quiet. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly. "In the chamber collapse, you could have let me die." Jeremiah didn't look at her, focusing instead on the dynamite he was carefully packing. "Don't mistake self-interest for brotherly love. I need you alive to testify that I helped. Might keep me from the gallows." But Clara had seen his face in that moment, the instinctive leap to pull her to safety. There had been no calculation there, only reflex. "I think," she said slowly, "there's more of our father in you than you admit." Jeremiah's hands stilled. John Blackwood was a self-righteous bastard who played favorites and kept secrets. He glanced at her briefly. But he was a man of his word, and he never left anyone behind. He returned to his work. "Take that how you will." Before Clara could respond, a distant rumble shook the chamber, another section of tunnel collapsing, Maxwell's men still pursuing. "They're getting closer," Thomas warned. "We need to move. Now." They gathered their supplies, the explosive charges, the documentary evidence, what little food and water remained. Jack would lead, guiding them to the vertical shaft. Thomas and Doc would follow, setting charges at key points along the way. Clara and Jeremiah would bring up the rear, protecting their retreat if necessary. As they prepared to leave, Thomas approached Clara, his dark eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity. "If something happens," he said quietly, "if we get separated, get the evidence to Denver. No matter what. Promise me." Clara recognized the soldier giving final orders, preparing for all contingencies, including his own death. "I promise," she said, throat tight, "but nothing's going to happen. We're all getting out." Thomas's smile was gentle, tinged with a sadness that suggested he knew better. "Of course we are." With those words hanging between them, they moved out, following Jack into the tunnel that led toward the courthouse, and either their salvation or their doom. Behind them, the rumble of pursuing destruction grew louder, a reminder that Maxwell's reach extended even into the bowels of the earth. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim hope of justice. And somewhere above in the clear Colorado sunshine, a town went about its Sunday business, unaware that beneath their feet 5 desperate souls carried the explosive truth that would change Silver Creek forever. Judge Ambrose Maxwell stood at the window of his courthouse office, watching as Silver Creek awakened to Sunday morning. Church bells rang in the distance, calling the faithful to worship. Miners, even on their day of rest, trudged toward the silver works that had made the town and Maxwell himself prosperous beyond measure. 20 years he had ruled this place, dispensing his particular brand of justice. 20 years of carefully accumulated power of secrets buried and fortunes extracted from the very ground beneath their feet. And now it might all collapse because of a girl with a map and an aging ex-soldier with an inconvenient conscience. Sir Maxwell turned to find his chief enforcer, a man known only as Reeves, standing in the doorway. Blood stained Reeves's knuckles, evidence of the questioning taking place in the courthouse basement. "The doctor's assistant still claims ignorance," Reeves reported. "Says he doesn't know where they've gone." Maxwell's expression remained impassive. "And you believe him?" "No, sir, but he might not break before he dies." "Then make sure he doesn't die until he breaks." Maxwell returned his gaze to the window. "What about the mines? Any sign of them? Men report hearing movement in the old Spanish workings. Could be settling rock." Maxwell nodded thoughtfully. The network of tunnels beneath Silver Creek was vast, with some sections dating back 2 centuries. He knew them better than most, had mapped them meticulously as he secretly expanded his mining operation, but even he couldn't predict where the fugitives might emerge. "Double the men at each exit point," he ordered, "and send someone to check the Devil's Fork Junction. If they've gone that way, they'll find themselves with nowhere to run." As Reeves departed, Maxwell moved to his desk, opening a drawer to reveal a silver pocket watch, not his, but John Blackwood's. He had taken it from the prospector's body as a trophy, a reminder of the fate that awaited those who challenged his authority. Now he turned it over in his hands, the engraved initials J.B. catching the morning light. Strange how objects outlived their owners, carrying memories long after flesh had returned to dust. A dull vibration interrupted his thoughts, subtle but unmistakable, like distant thunder, but coming from below rather than above. Maxwell froze, recognition dawning on his features. "Explosives," he muttered. He lunged for the door, shouting for Reeves, for anyone. But his words were swallowed by a deafening roar as the floor beneath him buckled, then gave way entirely. Clara pressed herself against the rough tunnel wall as the first charge detonated, sending a shock wave through the earth that loosened dust and small stones from the ceiling. The plan was in motion, no turning back now. 4 minutes until the main charges blow," Thomas said, checking his pocket watch in the dim lantern light. "Move." They hurried through the narrow passage that Jack had discovered, climbing steadily upward toward the surface. The vertical shaft loomed ahead, a ladder of iron rungs embedded in stone, disappearing into darkness above. "I'll go first," Jack offered. "Make sure the exit's clear." He began to climb his injured leg, making each step a struggle. Doc followed, then Clara, with the precious documents secured inside her shirt. Jeremiah came next, his bound hands making the ascent awkward, but not impossible. Thomas went last, his wounded shoulder threatening to give way with each rung. The blood loss and exertion had left him dangerously weak, but determination drove him upward, one hand over the other, ignoring the fire that blazed through his body. Above, Jack reached the top of the shaft, cautiously pushing open the trap door that led to the surface. Sunlight spilled down momentarily, blinding after hours in the tunnel's darkness. "Clear," he whispered back, pulling himself out and helping the others emerge. They found themselves in a small storage shed behind the courthouse, now visibly unstable. Its foundation cracked from the first explosion. People ran through the streets shouting in confusion and alarm. From inside the courthouse came cries for help. 3 minutes, Thomas reminded them as he finally emerged, face gray with exhaustion. Doc pointed to a small building across the street. That's where they're holding Samuel, my assistant. No time to waste, Jack said. Maxwell's men will be scattered confused. Our best chance is now. They slipped from the shed, joining the chaotic scene in the street. No one paid them much attention, just more townsfolk fleeing the damaged courthouse. They crossed to the building Doc had indicated, finding the door guarded by a single man whose attention was fixed on the courthouse drama. Thomas approached from behind the butt of his revolver, connecting with the guard's skull in one smooth motion. The man dropped without a sound. Inside, they found a scene from Nightmare. Young Samuel Davis lay strapped to a chair, his face bloody and swollen fingers bent at unnatural angles. A second guard turned in surprise at their entrance, reaching for his gun. Jeremiah moved with unexpected speed, throwing his body into the man despite his bound hands. They crashed into a wall, struggling for control. The guard's hand closed around Jeremiah's throat, squeezing with deadly intent. Clara acted without thinking, grabbing a heavy ledger from a nearby desk and bringing it down on the guard's head with all her strength. The man's grip loosened and Jeremiah delivered a final blow that left him unconscious. "Remind me not to make you angry with office supplies," Jeremiah gasped, rubbing his throat. Doc had already rushed to Samuel, checking his injuries with professional detachment that barely masked his fury. Multiple broken fingers, missing teeth, 3 broken ribs at least. They worked him over good. "Can he walk?" Thomas asked, checking his watch. 2 minutes. "I can walk," Samuel answered weakly, his voice slurred through broken teeth. "Just help me up." They cut his restraints, Jack and Doc supporting him between them. As they turned to leave, Samuel caught sight of Jeremiah. "That's him," he said, shrinking back in fear. "He was here. He watched them do this." All eyes turned to Jeremiah, whose face revealed nothing. "Is that true?" Clara demanded. "We don't have time for this," Thomas interrupted. "The charges!" "Answer me!" Clara insisted, her voice rising. "Were you part of this?" Jeremiah met her gaze steadily. "I've done many things I'm not proud of. This," he gestured to Samuel's broken body. "This wasn't one of them, but I didn't stop it either." The admission hung in the air between them, not innocence, but not the complete guilt Samuel had implied. 1 minute, 30 seconds, Thomas reminded them. "We need to clear the area, now." They exited into streets now thronged with people, courthouse employees, evacuating townsfolk gathering to witness the commotion, Maxwell's men trying to maintain some semblance of control. In the confusion, 7 people moving away from the courthouse attracted little notice. "Where to?" Jack asked as they reached the edge of the gathering crowd. "Livery stables," Thomas decided. "We need horses if we're going to reach Denver." They cut through back alleys, avoiding the main streets where Maxwell's men would be searching. The livery came into view, a large wooden structure on the town's eastern edge, where mountains rose beyond. 1 minute, Thomas said, his voice now barely above a whisper, strength fading rapidly. Clara moved closer, supporting him as they walked. "Just a little further," she encouraged. They were within 50 yards of the livery when shouts erupted behind them. Turning, Clara saw 3 of Maxwell's men pointing in their direction, drawing weapons. "Run!" Thomas ordered. They broke into a sprint, Samuel crying out in pain as the movement jarred his injuries. Gunshots rang out, bullets splintering wood around them as they reached the livery doors. Jack wrenched them open, ushering everyone inside. The cavernous interior held 24 horses in stalls, saddles hung on the walls, the air thick with the smell of hay and animal. 30 seconds, Thomas announced, collapsing against a support post, his strength finally giving out. Get the horses. Be ready to ride when it blows. Doc and Jack rushed to saddle mounts while Clara knelt beside Thomas, pressing a cloth against his bleeding shoulder. You're coming with us, she insisted. Thomas managed a weak smile. Not sure I'd stay on a horse right now. Then I'll stay with you. The map, he reminded her. Your promise. Before Clara could respond, Jeremiah approached, leading 2 saddled horses. He's right, he said quietly. The map is what matters. Maxwell has to pay for what he's done. Clara looked between them, the wounded man who had saved her life, and the brother who had made it hell. I'm not leaving either of you. Outside, the men pursuing them had reached the livery. They're inside, a voice shouted. Surround the building. 15 seconds, Thomas said, drawing his revolver with effort. Get ready to ride out the back when it blows. The explosion will cover your escape. Jeremiah made a sudden decision, cutting his bonds on a nearby saddle horn. Give me your gun, he said to Thomas. Thomas hesitated, then handed over the weapon. Don't make me regret this. Jeremiah checked the chamber's 2 bullets left. Not much, but enough. I'll hold them here. Buy you time. Clara stared at him in disbelief. What are you doing? Something John Blackwood might have done, Jeremiah replied, a strange peace settling over his features. The right thing for once. You'll die, she protested. Probably, he agreed. But you'll get to Denver. Maxwell will hang, and maybe people will remember something about me besides the mistakes. The doors rattled as Maxwell's men tried to force entry. Jeremiah moved toward them, gun held ready. 5 seconds, Thomas called. Clara made her choice, helping Thomas to his feet and toward a waiting horse. Doc had secured Samuel on another mount, while Jack held the reins of 2 more. Ready? Jack asked. Clara looked back at Jeremiah, standing alone against the doors. Jeremiah, she called, I forgive you. Her half-brother turned surprise, giving way to something like gratitude. Then the world exploded. The courthouse charges detonated with a sound like the end of days. The ground heaved beneath them, horses screaming in terror. The livery's back wall offered a clear view of the catastrophe, the courthouse collapsing in sections, dust and debris billowing skyward in a terrible cloud. In the chaos, Jeremiah flung open the front doors, firing both remaining bullets at the stunned men outside. Go, he shouted. Now. They rode hard through the rear exit, Clara pulling Thomas onto her horse, holding him steady as they galloped toward the eastern trail. Behind them, more explosions rocked Silver Creek as secondary charges ignited, creating a hellscape of fire and rubble where the courthouse had stood. Maxwell's men recovered quickly, mounting their own horses in pursuit, but the head start and the confusion in town gave the fugitives a critical advantage. They rode east, then north, following game trails that Thomas indicated, paths that wouldn't appear on any map, but that he had learned during his years in the mountains. By midday, they had put significant distance between themselves and Silver Creek. We need to stop, Doc insisted, noting Thomas's deteriorating condition. He won't survive much longer without proper care. They found shelter in a small canyon, a stream providing fresh water. Doc tended to Thomas and Samuel, while Jack scouted the back trail for pursuers. Clara sat beside Thomas, holding water to his lips. Stay with me, she urged. We're going to make it to Denver. All of us. Thomas's eyes focused on her with effort. You kept your promise, he murmured. The map. The evidence. Yes, she assured him, patting the documents still secured against her skin. We have everything we need to bring Maxwell to justice. Good. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Your father would be proud. He would be proud of you, too, Clara said softly, for helping his daughter. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. Not sure about that. But maybe Caroline would be. His hand went to his shirt pocket where the faded photograph remained. She always said, redemption comes from the choices we make, not the ones forced on us. Clara covered his hand with hers. And Jeremiah? What choice did he make? The hardest kind, Thomas replied. The one that costs everything. Jack returned his expression grim. Riders coming, at least 10, moving fast. They had perhaps 20 minutes before Maxwell's men found them not enough time to reach safety, especially with 2 badly injured men. Go, Thomas said, struggling to sit up. Take separate trails, split their force. We're not leaving you, Clara insisted. You have to, Thomas countered. The evidence must reach Denver. Samuel needs a doctor. Jack knows the territory. Doc has medical skills. He gripped her hand with surprising strength. You're the witness, Clara, the one who ties it all together. Maxwell goes free if you don't testify. The logic was irrefutable, but Clara's heart rebelled against it. And what about you? Thomas managed a weak laugh. I've cheated death more times than I deserve. Maybe my luck's run out. He grew serious. Or maybe I've got one more fight left. Doc returned from checking on Samuel. He's stable enough to travel. But Thomas, I know, Thomas said. Get them to Denver, Doc. Whatever it takes. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Time had run out. Go, Thomas ordered. Now, different directions. Make them choose. With tears streaming down her face, Clara pressed the silver nugget, her father's legacy, into Thomas's hand. For luck, she whispered. I'll find you again. Then she was on her horse, galloping north with the precious documents, while Doc and Samuel headed east, Jack taking a southeast trail. 3 targets, forcing their pursuers to divide their forces. Thomas remained in the canyon, using the last of his strength to position himself behind cover, checking his revolver reloaded with ammunition Jack had left him. 6 bullets against 10 men. Not good odds, but he'd faced worse. As hoofbeats approached, Thomas thought of Caroline and their daughter faces he had carried in his heart through 15 years of solitude. He thought of Jake Hollister dying in defense of justice, of Jeremiah Walsh finding redemption in his final act, and he thought of Clara Blackwood riding toward a future where truth might finally prevail. One last stand, he murmured as the first riders appeared at the canyon entrance. Make it count, old man. 2 weeks later, Clara Blackwood stood on the steps of the Denver Federal Building, watching as marshals led Ambrose Maxwell battered but very much alive into custody. His fine clothes were gone, replaced by prison garb that couldn't hide the burns and broken arm he had sustained in the courthouse collapse. He was found half dead in the rubble, the federal prosecutor informed her. Trapped in an air pocket. Damnedest luck. Or the cruelest justice, Clara replied, surviving to face his crimes. The evidence she had delivered, Ledger's correspondence, the silver map, had been irrefutable. Combined with her testimony and Samuel's, it painted a damning picture of corruption, murder, and theft that reached beyond Silver Creek to officials in Denver itself. The trial will begin next month, the prosecutor continued. With your testimony, he'll hang. Clara nodded satisfaction tempered by the cost of this moment. And Silver Creek, the people. The town survives. New leadership being established. The silver mine will be properly registered with profits benefiting the community. He hesitated. And as John Blackwood's legal heir, a significant portion will come to you. The irony wasn't lost on Clara. Her father's discovery, which had cost him his life, would now secure her future. "Any word of the others?" she asked. Dr. Miller and his assistant reached Wyoming territory safely. Jack Peterson has taken over a small newspaper in Idaho. The prosecutor checked his notes. No sign of Jeremiah Walsh, presumed dead in the livery fire. Clara had expected as much, but the confirmation still brought a pang of complicated grief. Her brother, her tormentor, had died, giving her a chance at justice and a future. "And Thomas Garrett?" she asked quietly. The prosecutor's expression softened with regret. "I'm sorry, Miss Blackwood. 7 bodies were recovered from the canyon where you separated. 6 of Maxwell's men and 1 unidentified." Clara turned away, unwilling to let him see her tears. She had known, of course. Known the moment she rode away that Thomas wouldn't survive. One man badly wounded against so many. It had been a suicide stand. Yet part of her had hoped. Foolishly, perhaps. But Thomas Garrett had seemed almost indestructible, a force of nature, rather than merely a man. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything." She descended the steps, moving through streets crowded with people going about their business, unaware of the drama that had played out in a small mining town. Denver was growing rapidly, the future rushing forward with steel and steam and ambition. Clara had a room at a respectable boarding house, paid for by the government, while she assisted with the case. She walked there now, plans forming in her mind. With her inheritance, she could go anywhere, do anything. California, perhaps. Or Europe, places where Silver Creek and its ghosts couldn't follow. The boarding house came into view, a 3-story Victorian with a small garden. As Clara approached, she noticed a figure sitting on the porch steps. A man in a new but simple suit hat pulled low over his face, a cane resting against his leg. She slowed, wariness ingrained after weeks of danger. The man sensed her presence, looking up as she neared. Dark eyes met hers across the distance, eyes she had last seen in a canyon, saying goodbye. "Thomas," she whispered, disbelieving. He stood with effort, leaning heavily on the cane. "Hello, Clara." She ran the remaining distance, propriety forgotten, as she embraced him, feeling solid warmth beneath her hands. Not a ghost, not a dream, but Thomas Garrett, very much alive. "How?" she demanded, pulling back to study his face. Thinner, more lined, but unmistakably him. "They said a body was found." "Maxwell's man," Thomas explained. "The last one standing. We shot each other. He died. I very nearly did." And his hand went to his side where a fresh wound lay beneath his clothes. "Found by a Ute hunting party. They recognized me from years back when I'd helped them during a smallpox outbreak. Took me to their healer." Clara's joy was tempered by the realization of how close she'd come to losing him. "And you're here now because I made a promise," Thomas replied simply, "to see justice done, to make sure Maxwell paid for his crimes." "He will," Clara assured him. "The trial is set. The evidence is overwhelming." Thomas nodded satisfaction in his gaze. "Good." He hesitated suddenly, uncertain. "And after, what will you do?" Clara hadn't realized until this moment how much that question had weighed on her. What future awaited a woman alone, even one with means? "I don't know," she admitted. "Travel, perhaps. See something beyond mountains and mines." "Good places to see," Thomas agreed. "Though mountains have their merits." He paused, gathering courage for words that didn't come easily to a man accustomed to solitude. I've been thinking of moving on myself. These old bones don't take to Colorado winters like they used to. Clara smiled, understanding the unspoken question. Any particular destination in mind? California, maybe? I hear the climate's favorable for those with bullet wounds and regrets. Thomas met her gaze directly. Might be more favorable with company. The invitation hung between them, not romantic, not yet, but something equally profound. A chance to begin again, two wounded souls supporting each other toward whatever lay ahead. I'd like that, Clara said softly. Thomas's weathered face relaxed into a smile that took years from his appearance. From his pocket, he withdrew a familiar object, the silver nugget she had given him for luck. Your father's legacy, he said, offering it to her. Clara closed his fingers back around it. Keep it. A reminder that some treasures are worth fighting for. As afternoon sunlight bathed Denver's streets in gold, they sat together on the boarding house steps, speaking quietly of justice served and journeys yet to begin. Of a town called Silver Creek, where secrets had festered beneath the surface until truth, like silver, had finally found its way to light. And somewhere in the high country beyond, the wind whispered through pines, carrying tales of those who had lived, those who had died, and those who had found against all odds a path to redemption in the wild heart of the West. Het van 5 Ketuk.